I am not even sure where to begin. My name is John, and I thought I had the kind of life most people dream of. A steady job, a loving wife, and two beautiful kids who are my world. My wife, Rachel, and I have been together for over a decade, married for 7 years. Our lives were full of the usual: work, errands, kids. We had routines, little habits that stitched our days together, and I thought we were happy. Turns out, I was a blind fool. The signs were there, but I ignored them. I wanted to believe we were just in a phase, a rough patch we pushed through. But about a month ago, I started noticing little things. Rachel had a new job in sales that she'd taken on last year. She was thrilled about it, proud, and I was proud of her too. But recently, she'd been coming home later and later, saying she had meetings or dinners with clients. At first, I thought nothing of it. I mean, that's just part of the job, right? Then came the night that tore my world apart. It was a Tuesday, and I came home early from work. I work construction, so when we wrapped up for the day sooner than expected, I figured I'd surprise her. I pictured her coming home to find me there, maybe with dinner started, maybe with a bottle of wine. But when I walked through the door, everything felt wrong. The house was too quiet, eerie, like a frozen picture. Rachel usually got home by 6, and it was already past 8. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, my steps echoing through the silence, and sank onto the couch. I don't know what I expected, but I couldn't shake the strange, creeping feeling in my gut. After about an hour, I heard the front door click open. I was sure it was Rachel, finally home, but when I looked over my shoulder, I saw a man I'd never seen in my life. He was standing there in my doorway, hand on Rachel's waist, smiling like he had every right to be there. Rachel froze when she saw me sitting there, and time seemed to stretch, bending around us. I stood up, beer bottle still in hand, trying to piece together what I was seeing. The guy looked like some slick Wall Street type, clean-cut, polished, with an air of arrogance that grated on me instantly. His gaze flicked between Rachel and me, and for a moment, I thought he was going to challenge me, like I was the one trespassing in my own damn home. "John, it's not," Rachel stammered, trying to get words out, her face pale as a ghost. "It's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like." That's the line people throw around in bad movies when they're caught in bed with someone else, and here she was, saying it to me. I didn't move. I didn't trust myself to speak. Anger started to twist through me like a live wire, and my fingers tightened around the bottle in my hand. And then this guy, this stranger in my home, dared to look me dead in the eye and say, "Rachel, maybe it's time to just tell him." Tell me what? The words hung in the air, dripping with something dark, something that turned my stomach. I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears, the blood pounding in my temples. Who was this man to her, and how long had this been going on? Rage bubbled up in me, but I held it back, desperate to hear whatever truth was about to spill out. Rachel looked at me, her eyes pleading. "John, please, just let me explain." Explain what, exactly? That I had trusted her every time she was out late or meeting with clients? That she'd been playing me for a fool this whole time? But before I could even form the words, she started talking. Words that made my world tilt, that turned everything I knew upside down. And that was just the beginning. I was standing there, staring at the two of them, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Rachel, my wife, was pleading with me to understand, and this guy, this stranger in my own house, had the nerve to sit down on the couch, like this was a normal situation, like he belonged here. "Who the hell are you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a growl. The man just looked at me calmly, his face frustratingly composed, like he'd prepared for this. "My name is Adam," he said, like that was supposed to mean something, like that would somehow make this okay. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Adam? He was some guy who thought he could waltz into my life and throw it upside down. I looked over at Rachel, expecting her to say something, anything that would make sense of this. But she just stared at me with those pleading eyes, like she was hoping I'd just accept it. "John, please, just hear us out," she said, stepping toward me. It's not as bad as you think. Not as bad as I think." I shot back, my voice rising. How could it possibly be any worse? Adam cut in. his voice soft but firm. "Rachel and I have been seeing each other for a few months now." He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was reciting the weather or a stock update, not admitting to a betrayal that was slicing through me like a knife. Seeing each other. The words echoed in my mind, bouncing around like a loose cannon. Seeing each other. This wasn't some fling. This wasn't a mistake or a single lapse in judgment. This was a deliberate choice, repeated over and over again. I took a step back, feeling like I was going to be sick. My hands were shaking, and I could barely hear anything over the pounding of my own heartbeat. "How long, Rachel?" I managed to ask, barely able to look at her. She hesitated, and that pause was answer enough. But finally, she spoke, her voice so small, I could barely hear her. "Almost a year. Almost a year. Nearly 12 months of lies, of pretending, of looking me in the eye every single day and lying to my face. And not only that, she had brought this man into our home, into the place where we built a life together. She had shattered everything we'd built, and for what? For him?" My head was spinning, and I couldn't stop the images flooding my mind of all those nights I waited for her, all those times she claimed she was working late. I had trusted her. I had believed her every excuse, every explanation. And now, it all felt like one big joke. But what came next was even worse. "John," Rachel said, stepping closer, her voice soft. "I know this is hard to hear, but Adam and I, we care about you. We didn't want to hurt you, but we couldn't keep lying. We thought, maybe we could talk to you about a new kind of relationship." I stared at her, dumbfounded. A new kind of relationship? The words came out before I could stop them, dripping with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Adam leaned forward, like he was some kind of therapist trying to guide me through this. "We were hoping," he began, "that you might be open to exploring an open relationship, a way for us to all be together, without having to hide or lie." I could barely process what I was hearing. They were suggesting that I join them? That I become part of this twisted arrangement, where they kept seeing each other openly while I just accepted it? "You're insane," I spat, my voice trembling with rage. "Both of you. You think I'd agree to something like that? You think I'd sit here and share my wife with some stranger like it's normal?" Rachel looked desperate, reaching out for my hand, but I pulled away. "John, please listen. I know it sounds crazy, but we both still care about you. I don't want to lose you. You don't want to lose me?" I couldn't hold back the bitter laugh that escaped. "You lost me the second you brought him into our life, the second you chose him over our family. And now, you think I'll just be okay with this?" Adam tried to speak again, but I raised a hand, cutting him off. "Get out," I said, my voice deadly calm. "Both of you. Get the hell out of my house." They looked at each other, as if debating whether to argue, but something in my expression must have told them I was serious. Rachel took a shaky breath, her eyes glistening with tears, but she didn't say anything. She turned and walked toward the door, Adam following close behind. As the door clicked shut behind them, the silence in the house felt suffocating. I collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the wall, trying to process the wreckage that had become of my life. I didn't know how long I sat there, numb, my mind spinning, but I knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. I sat in the empty house for what felt like hours, the quiet pressing down on me like a weight. Rachel and Adam had left, but their words echoed in my mind, poisoning everything they touched. They had looked me in the eyes and proposed the unthinkable. They wanted me to be part of their twisted relationship, to join them in some open marriage nightmare. I could barely wrap my head around it. How could she betray me like this? How could she stand there, tears in her eyes, and talk about not wanting to lose me after shattering my trust so completely? A part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the idea that she still cared, that maybe this was some kind of mistake. But then I'd remember that look on Adam's face, the smug calmness as he asked me to explore an open relationship. The rage I felt was like a wildfire, burning through every memory, every piece of the life Rachel and I had built together. Unable to sit in that suffocating silence any longer, I grabbed my jacket and headed outside. The cool night air hit me like a slap in the face, but I welcomed it, anything to clear my head. I needed to move, to escape the house that now felt like a stranger's place. I ended up walking to a park a few blocks away, the same park where Rachel and I used to bring the kids. I remembered how we'd sit on the bench and watch them play, how we'd laugh together, talking about our plans, about our future. Those moments felt like someone else's life now, like memories from a dream that was never real. I sat down on the empty bench, staring at the playground, and let the anger and confusion wash over me. I wanted answers, but at the same time, I didn't want to hear anything Rachel could say. Nothing would make this right. Nothing would undo what she'd done. I thought about all the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the way she'd brushed off my questions with casual excuses. How could I have been so blind? I trusted her, believed her without question, and now I felt like a fool. As I sat there, lost in thought, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Rachel's name on the screen. For a split second, I thought about ignoring it, letting her wonder where I was. But something compelled me to answer, maybe some last flicker of the old me, the man who believed in second chances. "John," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please come home. We need to talk." I wanted to hang up, to tell her there was nothing left to say. But against my better judgment, I found myself getting up and heading back toward the house. Maybe it was the need for closure, the need to confront her one last time. Or maybe I was just a glutton for punishment. Either way, I knew I wasn't going to find peace until I faced her again. When I got home, Rachel was waiting in the living room, her face pale and her eyes red and swollen. She looked fragile, almost like a stranger. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Thank you for coming back," she said, her voice shaky. "I know you're hurt, and I know you're angry. But please, John, just listen to me. Let me explain." "Explain?" I said, barely containing the bitterness in my voice. "Explain what, Rachel? How you lied to me. How you brought a stranger into our home and then tried to make me a part of it." She flinched, looking down at her hands. But then she took a deep breath and met my gaze. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back. But, John, it wasn't just about Adam. It was about us." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Us? You think you can blame this on us? Don't you dare make this about anything other than what it is. You wanted him. You chose him. And now you're trying to justify it to me." Her eyes filled with tears, and she took a step closer, reaching out as if to touch me. "John, please. I was lonely. I felt like we were drifting apart, like you didn't see me anymore. Adam, he made me feel wanted again, like I mattered." "Wanted?" The word felt like a slap to the face. "So that's your excuse? You felt ignored. So you decided to have an affair? You chose to lie to me, to lie to our kids, because you wanted attention?" She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I know it sounds selfish, and maybe it is, but it wasn't just physical. There were feelings, real feelings. Those words hit me harder than anything else she'd said. Real feelings. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was the fact that she'd made room in her heart for someone else. That she had, even in some twisted way, fallen in love with him. I felt like I was going to be sick, the rage and heartbreak swirling together until I could barely breathe. "Rachel," I said, my voice trembling, "I trusted you. I loved you. And you threw it all away." The silence between us was heavy, suffocating, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I could see the regret in her eyes, the pain, but it was too late. Whatever we'd had was gone, shattered beyond repair. "I'm sorry, John," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry wouldn't fix this. And as I looked at her, standing there with tears in her eyes, I realized I didn't know her at all. The woman I thought I'd married was a stranger, and the life we'd built together was gone. Rachel stood in front of me, her eyes filled with tears, looking like she expected me to comfort her. But I felt nothing but a hollow, aching void where my heart used to be. I didn't feel the urge to hold her or reassure her. All I wanted was to rewind time, to go back to the way things were before everything had shattered. "I don't know what you want me to say," I finally managed, my voice barely more than a whisper. "You think I'm supposed to just accept this? Pretend this never happened?" She shook her head, wiping her eyes. No, John, I don't expect you to just get over it. But maybe we can try to rebuild. I don't want to throw everything away. The audacity of her words struck me like a physical blow. Throw everything away? I repeated, incredulous. You already did, Rachel. You're the one who decided to have an affair. You're the one who chose to bring someone else into our lives. I was here, all this time, waiting for you, trusting you, and you threw that away. She looked down, biting her lip. I know I messed up, but I didn't plan for it to go this way. I didn't plan to fall for him. There it was again, that raw, ugly truth that was too big to ignore. She hadn't just betrayed me physically. She'd fallen in love with someone else. The words seemed to echo in the room, the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. How many times? I demanded, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. How many times were you with him? In our bed? In our home? She hesitated, and I could see the guilt written all over her face. It wasn't every time. Not at first. Her answer felt like a slap. I clenched my fists, barely holding back the urge to lash out, to yell, to demand answers that I knew would only tear me apart more. But I needed to hear it, needed to know just how deep this betrayal went. Did you ever think about me? I asked, the words trembling as they left my mouth. Did you ever think about what it would do to me? To us? Of course I did, she cried, taking a step toward me, her hand reaching out as if she could bridge the canyon between us. Every time I told myself it was wrong, I knew it would hurt you, and I hated myself for it. But I didn't know how to stop. I stepped back, out of her reach, feeling disgust twist in my stomach. You hated yourself? What about me, Rachel? What about the years we spent building this life? You think I wanted any of this? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I was lost, John. I didn't feel like myself anymore. I felt like a stranger in my own life, like everything we built was slipping through my fingers. And Adam, he made me feel like I was alive again. Alive? The bitterness in my voice was unmistakable. You think that's an excuse? You think that justifies anything you did? No, she whispered, hanging her head. It doesn't justify it, but it's the truth. I turned away from her, unable to look at her face, to see the regret and sadness that I no longer believed. I felt my heart harden, the love I'd once felt twisting into something darker. There was no forgiveness here, no second chance waiting in the wings. She'd made her choice, and now we both had to live with the fallout. For a long moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on us. Finally, I looked at her, feeling a strange calm settle over me. I can't do this, Rachel. I can't be the man who stands by and watches while you fall in and out of love with someone else. I deserve more than that. Our kids deserve more than that. Her face crumpled, and she reached out to grab my hand, her fingers trembling. Please, John, don't leave. Don't do this. We can try again. We can rebuild. I'll end things with Adam. I'll do whatever it takes. But I didn't feel anything. Her words fell flat, echoing in the empty space that had once held my trust, my love. It was too late for promises now. Too late for apologies and vows to change. It's over, Rachel, I said, my voice steady. You ended it the second you chose him over us. She started to sob, her hands covering her face, but I didn't reach out to comfort her. I didn't feel the instinct to make it better, to soothe her pain. All I could think about was the future. The life I'd have to build from the ruins of our marriage, the life I'd have to create for myself and the kids. I turned, my heart heavy, and walked out of the room, leaving her there with her regrets, her guilt. As I headed down the hallway, the weight of everything settled over me, a suffocating blanket of loss and anger. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was the end of us. I left the house that night without a clear plan, just an overwhelming need to get out, to breathe air that wasn't tainted with the memory of Rachel's betrayal. I got in my car, my hands shaking as they gripped the steering wheel, and drove with no direction. Streetlights blurred by, and the empty road seemed to mirror the emptiness I felt inside. I didn't know where I was going or when I'd stop. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there, couldn't stay in that house and pretend like things would ever be the same. Eventually, I pulled over into an all-night diner on the outskirts of town. It was a quiet place, tucked away from the world. I parked and sat there for a minute, just staring out the windshield, trying to absorb the reality that had crashed down on me. It felt like I was floating outside my body, watching my life unravel from some distant, untouchable place. After a while, I got out, went inside, and found a corner booth. The place was nearly empty, save for a couple of truckers at the counter and an old man nursing a cup of coffee. I ordered a coffee too, more for something to do than because I wanted it. The waitress brought it over without a word, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As I sat there, sipping the bitter coffee, memories of Rachel flooded my mind. I thought about the good times, the laughter, the lazy Sunday mornings, the way she used to look at me when we first met. It was impossible to reconcile those memories with the reality of what she'd done. I wanted to cling to those old memories, to remember her as the woman I fell in love with, but they felt like strangers now, distant ghosts of a life that didn't belong to me anymore. The anger came back, hot and suffocating, twisting inside me like a knife. I couldn't understand how she could do this to me, to our family. She hadn't just lied. She had betrayed the very foundation of our life together. And for what? Some other guy who made her feel alive? It was a cruel joke, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Dan's number. Dan was an old friend from college, a lawyer who specialized in family law. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but he was the only person I trusted to help me navigate this disaster. I hit call, hoping he wouldn't mind the late hour. Dan Roberts, he answered, his voice groggy but alert. Hey Dan, it's John. My voice sounded hollow, even to me. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need some advice. Legal advice. There was a pause on the other end, and then Dan's tone softened. John, man, it's been a while. What's going on? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Rachel, she's been having an affair. For almost a year. I found out tonight. He was silent for a moment, letting the words sink in. I'm sorry, John. That's damn. I can't even imagine. Yeah, I said, barely able to choke the word out. I need to know what my options are. I can't stay in this marriage. Not after everything. Dan sighed. All right. Look, I'll help you any way I can. First things first, we'll talk about custody arrangements for the kids, and then we'll figure out the rest. But John, are you sure you want to go this route? Divorce is hard. It's going to be rough on the kids. I felt a pang in my chest at the mention of the kids. I hadn't even let myself think about them, about how this would tear apart their world as much as it had mine. I don't want to hurt them, Dan, I said, my voice cracking. But I can't stay with Rachel. I can't look at her, knowing what she's done. All right, Dan said gently. We'll take it one step at a time. Let's meet tomorrow, and we'll go over everything. Just try to get some rest tonight. Thanks, Dan. Really, I muttered, hanging up and letting the phone fall onto the table. I sat there for a while, staring at the empty cup, feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into an uncertain future. I finally left the diner, still unsure of where to go. I couldn't bear the thought of going back to that house, of facing Rachel and pretending everything was normal. So I checked into a cheap motel down the road. The room was dingy, the sheets scratchy, and there was a faint smell of mildew in the air. But I didn't care. I just needed a place to lay down, to shut out the world and the mess my life had become. I lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. All the anger, the hurt, the betrayal, all of it felt like it was eating me alive. But beneath all of that, there was something else. A strange, hollow sense of relief. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to hold on to a marriage that had been rotting under the surface for far too long. It was over. And as painful as that was, there was a part of me that was ready to move on. With that thought, I closed my eyes, hoping that sleep would bring me some kind of peace, even if only for a few hours. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my life. And that, at least, was something. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the motel curtains, dragging me back into the harsh reality of my life. For a few seconds, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, hoping this was all some kind of twisted dream. But then it hit me. The betrayal, the empty promises, the image of Rachel with that man. It was real, all of it. I sat up, feeling the weight of everything settle back onto my shoulders. After a quick, cold shower, I got dressed and headed out. I was due to meet Dan later in the morning, but I needed time to clear my head. I stopped by a coffee shop nearby, hoping the caffeine might bring some focus to the chaos swirling inside me. The place was quiet, only a few people scattered at tables, lost in their own worlds. I sat by the window, nursing my coffee, and let my mind drift back to the kids. The thought of telling them about this nightmare made my stomach twist. How was I supposed to explain to a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old that their family would never be the same? That the life we'd built was gone, shattered by choices they couldn't possibly understand. I'd always wanted to protect them, to give them a stable home, a place where they felt safe. And now, thanks to Rachel's betrayal, that was crumbling. They didn't deserve this, and neither did I. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her take them from me. If there was anything worth fighting for, it was them. By the time I arrived at Dan's office, I had made up my mind. I was going to do whatever it took to keep my kids safe and close to me, no matter how messy the divorce got. Dan's office was small and tidy, with stacks of paperwork neatly organized on his desk. He looked up as I walked in, his expression shifting from professional to something softer, more empathetic. "John," he said, standing up to shake my hand. "Good to see you. Let's talk through this." I sat down, bracing myself. "I need to know what I'm up against, Dan. I can't let Rachel win custody. She's the one who blew this family apart, and I don't want her to be the only one in their lives. They need me." He nodded, leaning forward. "All right. First off, let's go over a few things. Divorce is never easy, especially with kids involved. Courts tend to favor stability for the children, so we'll need to show that you're just as capable, if not more, of providing that stable environment. Have you considered where you'll live if you leave the house?" I felt a pang in my chest at the mention of the house, the place that had been our family's home. But I knew I couldn't stay there. "I'll find somewhere close. I don't want to disrupt their lives any more than I have to." Dan nodded approvingly. "Good. That will look favorable in court. Now, as for Rachel, the affair won't necessarily influence custody directly, but it could impact the judge's view of her character if we play it right. I know this is personal, John, but to win this, we need to use every tool we have." I nodded slowly, the bitterness rising in me again. I never imagined I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office, talking about custody battles and court strategies. This was the stuff that happened to other people, to couples who had lost their way long ago. But now it was my reality, and if I was going to survive it, I had to be ready for the fight. Dan went over the details of the process, outlining the steps we'd need to take. He talked about gathering financial records, documenting my time with the kids, and preparing a statement that would show the court I was a devoted father. Each word he said felt like another nail in the coffin of the life I thought I had. I tried to stay focused, to listen carefully, but my mind kept drifting back to Rachel, to the lies, to the twisted version of her that I'd uncovered. "John," Dan's voice broke through my thoughts, pulling me back to the present. "Are you sure about this? It's going to be a long road, and it'll be rough for the kids, too." I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of his question, but deep down, I knew I couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies. "I'm sure, Dan. I can't be with someone who doesn't respect me, who doesn't value what we had. I won't let her destroy any more than she already has." He gave me a nod of understanding, scribbling a few more notes. "All right, then we'll get started. We'll file the papers, and I'll keep you updated every step of the way." After the meeting, I stepped outside, feeling a strange mix of dread and relief. It was over. The wheels were in motion, and soon, my marriage would be a thing of the past. But I knew that didn't mean the pain would just vanish. There was a long road ahead, one that I'd have to walk for the sake of my kids and myself. As I drove back toward town, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The real battle hadn't even started yet, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was coming. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let Rachel or her betrayal define my life. I would rebuild. I would find a way to pick up the pieces, for myself and for my kids. I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of my own reflection. I looked tired, worn out, like someone who'd been through hell and barely made it out the other side. But I knew that was temporary. I'd find my strength again. And as painful as this journey was going to be, I knew it was worth it. With a deep breath, I put my hands back on the wheel and kept driving, ready to face whatever came next. The weeks that followed felt like a blur. Paperwork, lawyer meetings, arrangements for the kids. I went through the motions, numb but determined. I told myself I was doing this for them, for the life they deserved, free from the lies and secrets that had taken root in our home. I'd moved out of the house, renting a small apartment nearby, just until things settled. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a place untouched by memories of Rachel's betrayal. My days were filled with routines that kept me moving forward. Every morning, I got up early, made breakfast, and planned something special for the kids each time they came over. I'd take them to the park, help them with homework, watch their favorite movies. And at night, when I was alone again, I'd sit in the silence, trying to figure out who I was now, without Rachel, without the life I thought I'd have. One evening, after tucking the kids into bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos. Pictures of Rachel and me smiling, holding hands, laughing. We looked so happy, so sure of each other, of the future. I felt a pang in my chest, a sharp ache that reminded me of how much I had once loved her. But that person, the woman in those photos, was gone. Or maybe, I realized, she'd never been who I thought she was. Maybe I'd fallen in love with a version of her that only existed in my mind. The pain was still there, raw and relentless, but it was changing. The anger that had once consumed me was softening, shifting into something else, something closer to acceptance. Rachel had made her choices, and I'd made mine. Our paths had split, and I was finally okay with letting her go. One Friday afternoon, I was walking the kids back to Rachel's house. They held my hands, chattering about their favorite parts of the day. I nodded along, grateful for their innocent laughter, their resilience. When we reached the house, Rachel was waiting on the porch, her face softening as she saw us approaching. "Thanks, John," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. I nodded, not trusting myself to say much. The tension between us had eased, but there was still an unspoken heaviness. A part of me wanted to ask her why, to dredge up the past and try to make sense of it, but I knew that no answer would ever be enough. Some things were better left unspoken. As the kids ran inside, Rachel hesitated, glancing at me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry again. For everything." Her words hung in the air, carrying a weight I hadn't felt in weeks. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her as she was, a flawed, complicated person who had made terrible choices. But I couldn't carry that weight anymore. I couldn't let her decisions haunt me. "Take care of yourself, Rachel," I said, my voice steady, even. "For the kids' sake." She nodded, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of the woman I'd once known, the woman I'd once trusted. But the moment passed, and I turned away, walking down the familiar path that led to my new life. Over the next few months, things slowly began to settle. I threw myself into work, took on extra projects, and filled my time with things that kept me grounded. I began working out again, running in the early mornings, feeling the burn of each step as I pushed myself harder. It was like I was shedding layers of who I'd been, rebuilding from the inside out. With every mile, every day spent with the kids, every moment of silence that I learned to embrace, I felt a little stronger. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but it became bearable, a reminder of what I'd survived, of the life I was rebuilding. And gradually, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat outside on my apartment's small balcony, watching the world grow quiet. I thought about the future, about the kind of father I wanted to be, the kind of man I wanted to become. For so long, I'd defined myself by my marriage, by the life I'd built with Rachel. But now, I was learning to define myself by something else, by my own resilience, by my ability to stand up and rebuild after the fall. There would be challenges ahead. I knew that. Co-parenting, moving on, and eventually, maybe, even opening myself up to the idea of love again. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could handle whatever came my way. I was no longer the man shattered by betrayal. I was the man who had survived it. And as I sat there, letting the quiet sink in, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay.